Welcome to the fifth and final week of our message series, All In. During this series, we've been giving you the same challenge that Jesus gave to his disciples 2,000 years ago, to go all in following him, to go all in being committed to the church, to go all in giving him everything you've got, so that in return, he can give you the biggest reward. After all, that is his call to us. He's calling us to go all in with our faith, all day, every day. So this series is all about how we can do that, how we can go all in our own lives. We kicked off this series by saying that God is calling each of us to go all in when it comes to trusting him. Let's face it, it's hard to totally commit yourself to someone you don't trust. So we're being challenged to go all in when it comes to trusting God, trusting that he will provide for us, and he always does. In the second week, we spoke about how God is calling us to go all in with his word. We should commit to reading the Bible and getting to know God better through that word, the living word that brings us hope, encouragement, and guidance. In week 3, we spoke about Martha and Mary and how busyness often builds up in our life whether we like it or not. But that God is calling us to go all in with our focus. God wants us to be focused rather than frantic. Because when we have just one guiding principle in our life, the rest of our life becomes naturally ordered toward that goal. We can become laser-focused on growing closer to God. And that's when we experience life change. Last week, we spoke about God's call to go all in when it comes to prayer. We had an honest and frank conversation that sometimes prayer can seem frustrating or pointless because it doesn't seem to work, or we don't get the outcome that we desired or when we desired it. We don't get what we want out of it. But we learn that prayer is actually about collaborating with God and not so much about demanding from God. Going all in and entrusting our desire to God is always a safe bet because God has our best interests at heart. God always has our best interests at heart. You know, that's often the temptation for people that holds them back from going all in. And that's believing that God doesn't have our best interests at heart, that he is, in fact, just wanting to dominate us, to take over our lives and change everything about us, to turn us into some perfect, pious little robots, right? The cookie-cutter God. But I can assure you that that is not God. He does not come into our lives to dominate us, but to enhance our life, to increase our success, and to strengthen our souls. And really, if we're being honest, each one of us can use that kind of force for positive growth in our lives. We all have things in our life that we wish could be different, goals that we're striving after, and difficulties to overcome. And oftentimes, we can hold an illusion of success, happiness, or motivation in front of others, right? We are masters at pretending to have it all together and being self-sufficient. But when it's just us, I think we recognize it's not enough. I mean, we read about exactly that kind of situation in our first reading today. Check it out. What does a person get from all their toil and strain? For their days are full of pain, and their work is a vexation. Even at night, their mind does not rest. And boy, can I relate to that. It's actually rather vulnerable for me to tell you this, but my staff members and anyone close to me constantly reminds me that I am an overworking major workaholic. You might not know that if you just see me on the weekend, but you don't see me behind the scenes. And I actually don't say that as something that should be praised. It can definitely set me back, and it does. Lack of sleep, constant stress and pressure that I put on myself affects how I see the world and how I interact with others and how I interact with God. But even if overworking is not your own problem, we all have our issues. We all do. Our areas where we overwork ourselves for other people's approval, right? Maybe we feel the pressure to continuously create better and better content on our social media so that others will approve of our lives and approve of our work. Maybe we feel the pressure to hurry up and find that boyfriend or girlfriend, in part to get our nosy aunt to mind her own business at family functions, but also to prove that we are in fact likable and wanted and lovable. Maybe we feel pressure to say yes to our teen when they want to go to that questionable party or that inappropriate movie for fear that they'll stop liking us, because nobody wants to say no, right? Nobody wants to. In all these areas, we strive and we strive and we strive to do our best and to carry the burden. And even when we get it right, there is this pressure to keep getting it right, to keep up the act. And that leaves us anxious and restless. It's a cycle. It's a pain. And as the writer says today, it's also vanity. God says that this kind of cycle doesn't reveal how hardworking or passionate or influential we are. Instead, it reveals a self-serving attitude. We work so hard as a kind of performance, a plea for other people to see us, to give us approval, or even to feel like we're worth it. You know, if I accomplish enough, if I do enough good, if my boss and my kids and my family and my spouse and even God, they'll all think that I'm worth it. And all that is a massive headache. Even if we somehow meet our own impossible standards, it never quite seems to satisfy us, does it? It never quite feels like it's enough. That's not because your efforts are useless. It's because you're putting your efforts towards the wrong goal. We put all our effort toward illusions of earthly success and power, while God calls us to strive for a secure and heavenly reality. Thankfully, our second reading points us in a different direction, in the right direction. Check this out. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. So, no more striving for just earthly rewards. No more aimless direction and exhausting, pointless efforts that get us absolutely nowhere. Because God has a different vision for us and for our lives. He doesn't want us to strive more, but He wants us to strive for more. He wants us to strive for something greater. Far from wanting us to just lose out, God wants us to dream big and to see the big picture. We touched on this a little bit last week in saying that it is safe for us to pray our deepest prayers and ask our biggest asks to God, because He has our best interests at heart, just like a parent does for their child, or at least a good parent does for their child. This week, I'm going to take this general point and take it a step further by saying that God wants us to be inspired towards greatness in our relationship with Him. Faith isn't meant to make us lead boring and predictable lives, but to inspire us to strive for greater goals with much more far-reaching benefits that last for all eternity. So how do we do that? Well, I think our second reading tells us just how. We see this. Put to death, therefore, whatever in you is earthly: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. See, we have to stop focusing on the earthly goals that can hold us back. Focusing on earthly goals when God has called us to greatness is like stopping at the first base camp when you're trying to climb Mount Everest. It's a little underwhelming and not at all rewarding, not considering all the practice and all the work that you put into to prepare to climb Mount Everest. Drop those earthly goals. Drop those habitual sins. Put them to death because they're holding you back from greatness. In fact, they're more than holding you back. The writer here says that they are idolatry. Okay? Idolatry. That's right. He's comparing it to idol worship, like the Jews worship the golden cow in the desert. And it might seem like these are extreme words, right? Put to death, idolatry. I get it. But that's only because there's a real and extreme risk to our souls in aiming so low. Right? We often set the bar really low. And we miss it. We miss out on God's will. We train ourselves to underestimate ourselves and God. And we give room to the enemy to get in there and do his dirty work, because that's what he's good at. So if we stop serving our own ego and our own whims, we find ourselves actually becoming much stronger. And it creates room for us to strive after the good goals that God has for us. It is the best trade-off ever. We exchange the momentary pleasure of lust for an authentic love that is all-consuming and that lasts forever. We surrender the desire for revenge or self-gratification and receive in return true justice and balance and fulfillment by the hands of God, who is fighting for us always and who always makes things right. We exchange greed and envy and anxiety over our money and our possessions for a strong desire for things that last long after our death into eternity. Things that money cannot buy. And when we move past the first base camp of earthly desire, we find ourselves challenged, absolutely. But we find ourselves growing too. I'd like to propose to you that we cannot grow unless we are challenged. You can't do it. It's like if you're going to the gym and you're always lifting the 5-pound dumbbell, that's all you ever do. You're never going to grow. That's all you'll ever do. You never learn to ride a bike by keeping the training wheels on all the time. You only learn to ride that bike once the training wheels have come off. You have to be challenged in order to grow. Otherwise, we flatline, right? We stay stagnant. It's the same old thing all the time. When we are challenged, and those challenges come, that's when we grow. When we allow ourselves to face challenges with God on our side, we inevitably find out that we are stronger than we ever thought we were. You ever look back and say, man, I did it. I had no idea I could do it, but I did it. So I encourage you, don't underestimate the power that you have. Don't do it. Don't underestimate the power that you have. For what you can access through surrendering to God and His will and His control is the power of a God who is eternally working with you and rooting for you. And this is the kind of God that we have. A God that is working with you and for you, and a God that always has your back. No matter what. When we lean into and focus on that reality, then you'll see. You'll see how life changes for the better every time you go all in.